Starter homes now cost at least $1 million in 242 US cities. That's a record, according to a new Zillow analysis. And if you hear that and think, well, that's just rich coastal cities being rich coastal cities, I get it, but I think that misses the bigger story here. Because this is not just about $1 million houses. It's about what happens when the first rung of the housing ladder turns into a luxury purchase. Hi everyone, I'm Daniel, and this is American Affordability. Today I want to talk about this new Zillow analysis that says starter homes now cost at least $1 million in a record 242 US cities. And right away, I want to be clear about what that does and does not mean. This does not mean that the typical starter home in America costs $1 million. It doesn't. Zillow says that the typical starter home nationwide is still around $198,000. So I'm not trying to exaggerate this into something it's not, but what it does mean is that in a growing number of cities, especially high-cost coastal markets, the cheapest third of homes in that area are now valued at $1 million or more. And that's a huge statement about what's happened to the housing ladder. Because a starter home used to mean small. Maybe it was outdated, or maybe it wasn't your dream house, or maybe the kitchen needed some work, or the yard was kind of tiny. Or maybe, the bathroom looked like it was last renovated in 1987, but it was supposed to be the first step. And that was the whole point. You didn't buy the perfect house. You bought the house that let you start. You bought something smaller, something, older, something maybe a little dated. You built equity. You fixed things slowly. And then maybe, a few years later, you moved up, and that was the ladder. But if the first rung of the ladder costs $1 million, that's not a starter home anymore. That's a gate. And I think that's the part people need to sit with. Because this is not just a story about rich cities getting more expensive. It's a story about what happens when the entry point to home ownership keeps moving further away. Now, here's what's actually happening. Zillow defines a starter home as a home in the lowest third of home values in a given market. So we're not talking about mansions. We're not talking about luxury waterfront homes. And we're not talking about the nicest house in the nicest neighborhood. We're talking about the lower end of that local housing market. And in 242 cities, that lower end is now $1 million or more. Think about that. The bottom third, the entry level, the first time buyer category, 7 figures. That changes the entire meaning of the phrase starter home. And yeah, a lot of these places are in high-cost coastal markets. California has a lot of them, and New York and New Jersey have a lot of them also. And there's also, there's expensive pockets around the country where, this has been building for years. So again, this is not every city. It's not every state or every market. But the reason this matters nationally is because it shows where the housing market can go when prices, supply, income, and interest rates get out of balance for long enough. And it shows what happens when the bottom of the market gets pulled upward. And once the bottom moves up, everyone above it feels that pressure too. So that raises a pretty interesting question. What happens to the housing ladder when the first rung disappears? Because this doesn't just affect first-time buyers. That's the obvious group, but it's not the only group. So let me make this concrete. If renters cannot buy, they stay renters longer. If first-time buyers can't buy starter homes, then they can't build equity. If current homeowners don't move, then the inventory stays tight. And if downsizers don't downsize, then smaller homes don't open up. If builders don't build enough entry-level homes, then the shortage continues, and then everyone starts competing for the same limited supply. And that's how the ladder breaks. Not all at once. It's not with, just one dramatic event. It breaks slowly, when each step gets harder than the last step. And I think that's what a lot of people are feeling right now. They're not saying, I need a perfect house. They're saying, where is the normal house? Where is the small house, or the, just the basic house? Where's the house that needs some work, but, it's still affordable for me? Where's that house that just lets me start? Because for a lot of people, the dream was, it was never a mansion. The dream was a manageable payment. It was a place to build a life, a yard for the dog. It was, a room for a kid. It was a garage. Maybe it was because of the neighborhood. Stability, that's it. And when even the basic version of that starts moving out of reach, people absolutely notice. Now let's talk about the math, because this is where the headline becomes real. So a $1 million starter home sounds absurd on its own, right? I think most of us could probably agree with that. But the payment is where it really hits. If you buy a $1 million home and you put 20% down, that's $200,000 up front. And I mean, let's just pause there. Because for a normal first-time buyer, $200,000 is already a massive amount of money. And that's not just a casual down payment. That's more than many households have saved for their retirement. I mean, I talked about it the other day in a video. And after putting $200,000 down, you're still financing $800,000. At a mortgage rate right now, say around 6.5%, principal and interest alone is roughly $5,000 a month. And that's before property taxes, that's before homeowners insurance, or HOA fees, or maintenance, or repairs, or utilities. I mean, we could go on, right? Before the new roof, before the new HVAC system. For me, living here in Tampa, I'm telling you, the AC is not optional. Or if I got friends, I got people that I know that live out in like Phoenix. Living in Phoenix, AC is not optional. So when people hear $1 million starter home, I don't think they always understand what that means month to month. It doesn't just mean that the home is expensive. It means that the entry fee is massive, that the monthly payment, again, massive. And the income required for all that has to be, yes, you guessed it, has to be massive. And what comes with all that? Risk, right? So that makes the risk massive. Because a starter home is supposed to be the safer first step. But when that first step requires a $200,000 down payment and a $5,000 plus monthly payment before everything else, that's not normal starter home math. That's high income household math. And this is where the frustration comes from. Because people, they may remember starter homes as something humble, but still achievable. I mean, sure, maybe you had to sacrifice, maybe you had to buy in a less trendy neighborhood, and maybe the house needed work. Maybe it, wasn't perfect, but it existed. I recall, I don't remember the house, I've seen the house, but I recall my dad bought his first house. I want to say it was in the very early 80s, in the 1980s, in Appleton, Wisconsin. And I mean, this is a small house. I mean, I'm talking like under 1,000 square feet. And it was definitely a starter home. But my dad, I think he paid like $18,000 for this house. I mean, that's wild. Because today that house is valued much more. So I don't know. The world is changing. And, again, that's where the frustration is coming from. People remember these homes as being humble, achievable. Like I said, maybe you had to sacrifice, right? Maybe you had to buy in a less trendy neighborhood, or maybe the house needed some work. It wasn't perfect, but it existed, and that was okay. And for a lot of buyers today, the starter home either just doesn't exist where they live, or it exists at a price that makes completely no sense. And that changes life decisions for people. That makes people rent longer. It makes they move farther away from family, friends, jobs, things like that. They have to then commute longer. And this has snowball effects. They delay having kids. They stay with roommates longer. They leave these expensive cities entirely, and they keep waiting for the market to make sense. And then people wonder why younger Americans are frustrated. I mean, what did we expect? If the first step into ownership becomes unreachable, people are going to feel like the system's not working for them. And honestly, this is not just about young people either. I mean, there are people in their 40s and 50s who got divorced, moved cities, had medical issues, lost jobs, or had life happen, and now they're trying to re-enter the housing market, and they're not 24-year-olds looking for a trendy downtown condo. I mean, these are adults just trying to rebuild stability. And they're running into the same wall. The market doesn't care why you're starting over. It just shows you the price. And that's the harsh part. Now, here's where I want to connect this to Tampa and to Florida just a little bit. Now, I'm not saying that Tampa is the same as San Francisco or coastal California, because it's definitely not. But living here, you can absolutely feel how the idea of the starter home has changed. I mean, there are homes around Tampa that would have seemed like normal middle-class houses not that long ago. And now the price makes you stop and think, wait, that's the starter house now? And again, then, you add insurance and property taxes, HOA fees in some areas. You got to add in maintenance. And, you add the reality that a lot of these older Florida homes need roofs, AC units, plumbing updates, electrical work, or flood considerations. And then suddenly, boom, the sticker price, I mean, that's only the beginning. And that's the thing about housing affordability. It's not just the price of the house. It's the price of owning the house. And like here in Florida, that distinction matters a lot, because you can technically afford the mortgage and still get crushed by insurance and repairs, or unexpected maintenance issues. And that's why I always come back to monthly reality. The listing price, that gets the headline, right? The monthly payment, that determines your life. And for first-time buyers, that monthly reality is getting harder. Now, some people say, well, let's just move somewhere cheaper. And, I get that argument, but, sometimes moving, sure, yeah, it's the right answer. There are more affordable markets. There's parts of the Midwest, the South, and, smaller metro areas where the numbers are definitely more realistic. And even Zillow points out that the typical starter home, again, nationally, is still under $200,000. So, yeah, affordability still exists in parts of the country, but, to say just move is not as simple as people make it sound. Move where, right? Move where? Where are the jobs? Where's your family? Where's your spouse's job? Where are the schools? How good are the schools? Where's your health care? What about your support system, right? What does insurance cost there? What does your commute look like then to go to work? I mean, can you actually build a life there? I mean, moving can solve one problem and then it can create 5 other issues. So yes, geographic flexibility, it matters, but we shouldn't pretend that everyone can simply teleport to an affordable market and then keep the same income, the same support system, the same career path, just the same overall quality of life, because that is not real life. Now here's where it gets really interesting. When starter homes get too expensive, people don't just give up on buying houses, they start changing the path. Some people, like I mentioned, they rent longer. Some people skip the starter home and wait until they can buy something bigger later. Some people buy with family help. Some people, they move farther out from the city. Some people take on bigger mortgages than they probably should. Some people buy fixer-uppers that are more expensive to fix than they originally expected. And some people leave entire regions and move really far away. And then, there's some people that just accept that homeownership may not happen for them. And that, for the United States, is a big cultural shift, because homeownership has been one of the main ways that Americans build wealth. I mean, it's not the only way. Talked about this the other day. But it is a major way. I mean, you buy a home, you pay down the mortgage, the home appreciates, you build equity, that equity gives you options later. Maybe you move up, maybe you borrow against it, maybe it becomes part of retirement, maybe it gives your family stability. But I mean, if people can't get into ownership until much later, or maybe just not at all, then wealth building changes also. And that's why the starter home matters. Because, it's not just a small house. It's the starting point for an entire financial path. And if that starting point disappears, the consequences can last for decades. And that's the bigger issue. I mean, this is not just about today's buyer being frustrated. It's about tomorrow's wealth gap. If one group bought homes when the entry point was affordable, and another group comes of age when the entry point is unreachable, those two groups are not playing the same game. And then years later, people act surprised that wealth inequality grows. I mean, how could it not? If some households get to start building equity at 28 and then other households are still renting at 42, the numbers never worked. And, that compounds over time. So it changes everything. And I also want to be honest about the other side. Homeowners are not villains because their homes went up in value. Most homeowners did not create the housing shortage. They bought a house, they made payments, they maintained it, and benefited from the market. That's not evil. And a lot of homeowners, they're also stuck. They may have equity, but they also have a low mortgage rate that they don't want to give up. I mean, I'll be honest, I'm in that position. I don't necessarily want to move, but I have a really low interest rate on my home since I bought it in late 2021. And I know right now, if I wanted to move, interest rates are much higher. I mean, people might want to move, but buying the next house at today's rate and today's price, like I said, just makes no sense. So what do? They stay. That keeps inventory tighter, and then buyers have fewer options. So again, this is a system problem. It's not as simple as blaming buyers or as blaming sellers or blaming investors or blaming interest rates. I mean, all of those things can and do matter, but the larger problem is that America didn't build enough housing in the right places for a long time. And then the pandemic housing boom poured gasoline on an already strained system. Low interest rates made people willing to pay more. Remote work changed demand. People wanted more space. Inventory was tight. But construction did not keep up. And then rates went up. But prices didn't fully reset in many places. And now buyers are dealing with the worst combination, right? High prices and high rates. And that's brutal because when rates are low, high prices, when they were low, high prices were easier to swallow. And when prices were lower, higher rates were easier to manage. But high prices and high rates, that's where affordability breaks. And that's where many buyers are stuck right now. I mean, they're not being picky, they're not demanding luxury, they're looking at the math and realizing that the payment just doesn't work. Now, what's the solution? I mean, I wish there were a simple answer, but let's be real, there isn't. Lower rates would help, but lower rates alone could also bring more buyers back and push prices up again if supply is still limited. More housing would help, especially more entry-level housing, but building takes time. Zoning matters, land costs matter, labor costs matter, materials, those matter, right? Got to have materials to build these houses. Local opposition, politics of it all, that happens. There's insurance, there's financing. So yes, we need more housing, but saying that, building more housing is easier than actually getting it built where people need it, right? Saying it is easier than doing it. We also need to think about what kind of housing actually gets built, because if every new project is luxury apartments or expensive single family homes, I got to call out Tampa here. The Tampa Bay area is famous for that. That doesn't solve the starter home problem for normal buyers. People need smaller homes. They need townhomes, condos, duplexes. We're missing middle housing, right? Entry-level ownership options. Not everyone needs a 3,000 square foot house. A lot of people just need a way to start. And that's the key word here, start. Because if people can't start, then they can't move up. And if enough people can't move up, then the whole ladder gets weaker. So here's my bottom line. The headline says starter homes cost $1 million in 242 US cities. But the real story is not just the $1 million number. The real story here is that the first step into home ownership has become too expensive in too many places. And when the first step gets too high, the first rung, right, too high on that ladder, everything after it changes. Renters stay renters longer. First-time home buyers delay. Families move further away. Current homeowners stay put. Inventory gets tighter, and wealth building gets delayed. And the old housing ladder starts to look less like a ladder and more like a wall. And that doesn't mean that buying a home is impossible everywhere. It's not. There are still affordable markets. There's still people buying homes. There's still paths to, into home ownership. But the path is narrower, way narrower than it used to be. And in some cities, it's almost unrecognizable. And that's what this Zillow article is really showing us. Not that every starter home in America costs $1 million, but that in a record, but that in a record number of cities, the starter home has become something it was never really supposed to be, a luxury product. And if that keeps spreading, then we have a much bigger problem than high home prices. We have a broken housing ladder. So I'm curious, what does a starter home cost where you live? And if you bought your first home years ago, do you think you could afford that same first home today? Drop a comment below, because I think this is, again, one of those topics where local experiences really matter. And if this gave you some perspective, I'd appreciate the like. It helps way more than you know. Keep learning, keep adapting, keep moving forward, and please share with your friends. It's all you can do, right? As always, I'll see you in the next one.